Good morning, everybody.
Good
Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's beautiful here today. I actually got outside before our sunny day, and it doesn't feel like winter.
Yeah, must be nice. Here in Eastern Ontario, hey, listen, we finally cracked out of minus 20. It's actually been a little bit above freezing the last couple of days. So that's
And we're
kind of
talking
fun.
Celsius, right?
Yes,
Not
Celsius.
Fahrenheit. So
Yeah.
just
Yes.
putting it out there.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So, but that's, that's what normal should be this time of year.
Yes.
We still get to grumble about it around here anyway. It's our right as Canadians to grumble about the weather. So very cool. Hey gang, don't forget, instructional designers in offices, hanging out, drinking some coffee with our mugs. Brought to you by Domino Learning Systems. Come and join us. Check us out on the interwebs, www.dominknow.com. Have to spell it out because, we're so clever, we made it tricky. And we also, go ahead and order pizza if you want to go to the wrong URL. That's fine too. We don't have a problem with that either. But hey, gang, this week we have Bianca Bauman joining us. Bianca, folks might not actually know you, although you do speak at lots of events and you hang out at conferences and those sorts of things. But for those folks who haven't met you yet, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. Hello, everyone. Super excited to be back after, I don't know how long, but this, you know what? It's funny, Chris. This has been one of my, I think, first appearances I had done when I started to speak at conferences and whatnot.
Wow.
So always near and dear to my heart. But I'm a fellow Canadian, and I'm the VP of Learning Solutions and Innovation at Ardent Learning, or custom learning shop. And I've been in this industry more than 15 years now. And, I'm one of those people. I actually didn't fall into learning and development, which is not a bad thing. I actually decided this is what I want to do with my life when I went to university. So it goes all the way back. And, over the years, I kind of found a little niche for myself with marketing and learning and development and how they overlap and how we can learn from one another. And yeah, super excited to be here.
Very cool. And we've had versions of this conversation, in the past as well. But so let me ask, how did you sort of start connecting the idea that marketing, had things that L&D could even take advantage of?
Yeah, my very first real job when I came from Canada, from Germany, was it was a whole bunch of jobs before that just to pay the bills and get the paperwork done. But the first real job was with Eloqua, which is now part of Oracle, as a marketing automation platform, or how they like to call themselves, a revenue performance platform. And my job at the time was to teach our customers how to be better marketers. And I realized, I was like, oh, there actually is a lot of overlap between marketing and learning, which mainly is that we're both driving people to action, right? Different behavior. Usually, what I like to say is the difference is marketers usually do it a little bit better than we do. But to be fair, they also have bigger budgets, so that has a little something to do with it for sure. But yeah, that's really, where it started. And I started blogging about it, and, the messaging really evolved over the years. But yeah, that's how it all started back in 2011. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've often thought when I think of instructional designers, they're almost like Kevin Costner and Field of Dreams. I build this awesome thing. They're going to come, and great it did in the movie, but we're marketers that they do some awesome things. Sometimes things are like, hey, it's good enough and get it out, but they get the promotion out there, and there's a lot to be learned from it. And I know you've been talking about that for quite some time. I'm curious as to when you do your presentations, what are some of the comments back that you get from folks, or some of the aha moments that they're like, wow, this is what really drove it home for me?
Whew, how much time do we have? So I start with I think I also work very closely with Mike Taylor on this topic, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. But we talk a lot about attention span in general and how to grab someone's attention. And one of the questions we like to ask beginning of our sessions, like, what would you like to steal from marketing? And answers usually include being more emotional in our delivery, graphics, visuals, writing better, right? So those are kind of like much more tactical elements. But we also talk a lot about more strategic elements to this. So it's not necessarily about promoting what we're doing. It's kind of part of it. But you're really looking into what marketing techniques can you bring into learning and development to improve our learning experiences. And, even, again, if you think even more strategically, how can we reskill our workforce better? What does that look like? But I think learner personas is always a hot topic for sure, right? Marketers do a great job in identifying who their buyer personas are, and then creating content that fits the need of that persona. So that is always a huge hit. We talk about content strategy is a good one too, where we're already thinly stretched. I understand that as L&D professionals. So it's like, now Bianca, you asked me to be content strategist on top of everything else. But when I talk through that, there's always these aha moments too. It's like, okay, I don't have to reinvent the wheel, but let's just get organized with all of our content, right? And then the third one I want to mention is learner journeys and learning campaigns. And Paul, you started talking a little bit about this. Like, marketers are really good in thinking about campaigns like long-term versus like that one-time event, right? And I think those three are always the biggest, like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention, since you mentioned Mike Taylor, you and Mike have a book on this coming out from ATD. I think it's coming out in May.
That's right, Chris, is May 27th, and it's called Think Like a Marketer, Train Like an L&D Pro.
There we go.
Yeah.
So I'm flagging it so that folks are scribbling notes furiously
yes, please.
here.
Thank you.
In the coming months, they can actually just get a transcript by going to the ATD shop and picking up a copy. So yeah, that's very super cool. In fact, I was actually surprised that you guys hadn't done this already as a book.
It's funny, Chris, because Mike and I have been talking about this for a while. Like, it's like we want to do something else, and we weren't really sure, is it a book or is it like, what is it? And then 2.5 years ago at DevLearn, I don't even really know what happened, but Mike was like, let's do it. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. So
well, for anybody who's done a book, it's a journey in itself to go ahead and do that and get it done and figure out how can I turn what I've been talking into to something that is topical yet will maintain itself. As more permanent. You were talking about targeting the personas of folks there, and I think of targeting different audiences, and that's certainly something from a marketing standpoint. They think of, hey, here's the personas, and especially the bigger campaigns and stuff. It may try to be getting them to buy a certain product or do a certain thing, but they have different messaging that's similar but different for each of the different personas that they're targeting, really speaking to what's in it for them. And yeah, I think we get caught a little bit in the training of, hey, you're improving yourself. Isn't that enough? But we're all busy in the motivation. And this is something that we at Domino have talked about, how can you take your training, not reinvent the wheel every time, but target different audiences, yet retain some of the same things. What are some of the things that has come out of that for you from a practical standpoint, but also something of an example that someone can latch on to of, oh yeah, because sometimes when people think about it, it's like, oh, I need to create a whole nother training program for this group. And it's really not that.
Yeah, that's a great. You're full of great questions this morning, Paul. I love it. Yeah, so before I answer the question, the one thing I want to say, I'm a big believer in learner personas, but they're also not the holy grail. So I want to put that out there right away. Are they a way to personalize all of our training for every single individual? No, they're not, right? But they're getting us much closer to that point, and especially now with AI, we'll be able to actually facilitate that personalization much better. But for me, the main purpose often behind personas is to get everyone thinking about the learner before they think about the content, because often it's the other way around, right? I need a 30-minute e-learning module. I'm like, okay, why 30 minutes? Why an e-learning module? Like, there's so many other questions. But what I highly recommend when you start thinking about creating learner personas, use a program that is recurring. So it could be, compliance training, health and safety, onboarding, something that's, rather large. Because if you really just have like that one-off request, which we'll always have, and that's okay. It doesn't make sense to do a research-based learner persona because it'll take you longer to create the personas than it would take you to actually create the training. So that would be like kind of my first recommendation, to make sure you have a program that's large enough so it makes sense, and then you can get the buy-in from the stakeholders. Like, that's really, really important. The business needs to be behind you. They really need to understand why we're doing this. And an example that I like to use is, so Doug Dietz, like way in the days, he actually was tasked to create an MRI scanner. So this is a very, popular design thinking example. And so he went out and created a new MRI scanner, looked fancy schmancy, did all the things, right? But then when they put children in there, more than 80% of children had to be sedated because they were scared of this machine. So he realized, oh, yeah, the machine works, but it doesn't work for all target audiences. So he went back and he created this pirate ship adventure MRI, which is kind of really cool. And I like to use that example to really educate my stakeholders on why this is important, why we want to look at personas. And then, on average, I like to do 3 to 5 to get started. And this way, you have a good understanding of what's happening in your organization. And then the next step, once you have those learner personas, is now you create the learner journeys for them. But Paul, to your point, you would create a learner journey from A to Z, basically like anything that anyone would ever have to know about something. But then you identify, okay, for this persona, they would only take A, D, and K. And, this other persona jumps straight to W because they know everything else before. So this is kind of where the personalization comes in. To your point, you do not have to recreate the wheel. You just identify what each persona needs at what time, at what point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about from the journey. And it sounds like from a training standpoint, I mean, depending on your tooling set, obviously all tools are not created equally. Some of your content, whether it's through more complex branching and variables or a simplified targeting system within it, you can have it adjust for that persona. Or if you don't have any of that, you could just make it down into the micro learning and then having almost your LMS plan kind of bring out those different pieces, substituting those in and adjusting it. But yeah, I think to all the, especially even more today, the marketing, I always think of it as trying to get me to buy something I don't necessarily want. But even the better is it's showing me something that I maybe do want, and then I express interest and bringing that to me. As you talked about the journey, I was thinking of some other systems where they had talked about skills, and they came to some realization that if you identify the skills and then just show them what they can do, A lot of folks don't actually go out and do that. But if you take the skills and then start feeding them, as you talked about, part of that journey in there, there's a lot more uptick and uptake for that training.
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's I came across someone, and if he's listening, I'm sorry, but I came across someone at Devler, and he was like, he was in a session, and he says, "Oh, Bianca, our HR department just purchased 1,000+ soft skill courses, and now my job as the sole L&D person is to make it fit." And I'm like, oh boy, right? And so it goes back to that, A, it's not targeted, which, is bad in and itself. But now it's also, we always think that if we give learners everything, they'll be happy because they can pick and choose. But there's a lot of research out there that actually shows it's actually the opposite because there's too much. You think about it, you go to a restaurant, there's like 50 items on the menu. It takes me forever to pick something, right? Put 10 on there. I'm like, okay, this is what works for me, right? And so if you do your research well, and I said this before, personas need to be research based. You can't just go out there and make assumptions. Have interviews, look at data, look at employee surveys, HRIS systems, LMS, LXP, whatever you have, right? To get as much data as possible. And then, yeah, the interviews for me are like the biggest piece to really dive deep into what these people are looking for, what they need. If you can't do interviews, surveys will do, but you can have a follow-up question, which is always a little harder. But then use that information and create the journeys based on what they need. And then I loved how you bring the skills into all of this, Paul, because when I go through a learner journey workshop to really understand, what is it all, I do borrow from design thinking as well. And I like to use problem statements and then how might we questions on kind of like helping our stakeholders understand what these learners need to do. And then real quick, you can pull out these skills. I mean, everyone always goes to content first. I think that's just, we'll never get over that. But again, as a facilitator during these sessions, like that's your job, right? To pull out what you actually need and really focus on those skills. And then, yeah, it's just much more relevant to the learner in the end versus here's, smorgasbord of everything you could think of.
Yeah, we get focused on what people should know versus what we really want is what people should do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what do they need to know in order to do that is a great filter to start winnowing out the sheer wave of info that we might be tempted into or feel that they need to know everything about everything, but staying focused on tasks or skills or specific actions that they need to carry out as part of the plan. So learner personas was the first thing that you flagged, and I'm apologizing because I haven't had enough coffee. But what was the second thing that you had flagged as your top three earlier here?
Yeah, we did talk about the content strategy piece.
Righto. Sometimes when we think about marketing, we think about what popped into my brain just as we were getting started, like, oh, Super Bowl ads. Okay. But then the other thought that crossed my mind was, yeah, those aren't really, well, they have a marketing effect, but they don't, sometimes they're more about, vanity or what in marketing world would be called awareness or may not lead to actual, actions, etc. And we think about, glossy commercials like that and things like that. But it seems to me that some of the secrets really are the strategies that marketers are. It's more fundamental stuff than I guess what we might observe. When Prime is now injecting commercials in between my episodes of whatever I'm streaming that given week. And I know you guys have done a great job. I was crashing through the info on the ATD site. And folks, I did put a link in the LinkedIn chat to the upcoming book. So if you're interested in checking that out. That it really is strongly, that fundamentals, that groundwork kind of a thing, as opposed to, ooh, let's make a trailer video for every e-learning course, which was something that some folks were, tossing out there a few years ago, that idea of, oh, let's promote it, like a marketer. So let's tip into something, again, more fundamental on that level. What else would you like to share with folks today?
Yeah, I would love to pick up what you said about the Super Bowl ad, because funny enough, in one of the chapters, I do talk about the Super Bowl ads. And the reason being is that, they're so anticipated already. It's just fascinating how marketers created this environment around the Super Bowl, right? So
Mhm.
that's one thing. And a lot of companies actually were able to build a whole social media campaign around some of their ads too. So the one I'm talking about, you might remember it, this was Snickers, when Betty White is actually like becoming one of the players. And the reason,
Mhm.
it's Betty White is because the guy's hangry, right?
Yeah.
And we're still using that today. And that ad was, years ago. But yeah, they had like the social media campaign attached to it back in the day too. So I think in general, marketers are really good in just doing that, right? And identifying where else can I actually um almost like blow this out a little bit, right? So I think it's really, really important. So it's funny you brought that up. But you're absolutely right around the fundamentals. So going back to the book a little bit, it is a mix of like strategy and tactical stuff. And the tactical stuff you can totally use to, create that teaser or promotion video for something that's coming out 100%. Like those strategies and techniques and tools, or, can be used for something more strategic or for something more tactical. But from the fundamental perspective, that's why I'm a nerd around content strategy. And I know it sounds boring, right? It's like you think of marketing, you think of those Super Bowl ads. You don't think about, oh, I'm going to sit there and take an inventory of my content, right? But that's really what it is. If you look at a content strategy, it's really an inventory. I mean, think about you go into a grocery store, right? And you pull items off the shelf. Obviously, there's a system in the back end to realize, okay, that shelf is now empty, and we have to order more stuff and put that in there. And every time you go to the grocery store, stuff is there, or at least most of the time, right? And so that's kind of the thinking around that content strategy piece too, is like, what do I need, right? So instead of being reactive, we need to be much more proactive. So if you have an inventory, you know exactly, what you need, then it's so much easier to plan. Um, I think the audit itself is also really important. So it's not just like listing what you have, but what kind of learning and performance objectives are we trying to achieve with this piece of content, right? What channel are we using for that? And what are meta tags I could use to then find that content, right? So there's a lot that just goes into that. And what I really love about the thinking that marketers have with the content strategy is, when I ask the question like, what is content to you? A lot of people say, oh, it's an e-learning or a video. Well, technically, that's a content type. So the content is what goes into that bucket of an e-learning or video. So it's actually much better to save your content in just a plain old Word document, for example, because then I can take that and reuse it in different content types and different content channels, right? So for me, that's like a big aha moment that really actually only came out when we were researching the book. So there's a lot of things that kind of came out of that research as well, right?
And
Well, it's
I
kind of
think
neat
he,
that
oh,
it's kind
go
of neat
ahead.
that as you were putting the book together, you were still learning.
Oh, absolutely, right?
Yeah,
It's like both Mike and I, we had many, many aha moments where we're like, oh, we kind of talked about it this way, but we should really talk about it that way. So, it's like, yeah, it's really cool.
that's fun. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, you almost uncover and unwrap those different things as you're looking into it there. As you were chatting there, I was thinking a little bit more back to when you talked about the data and the interviewing. And of course, part of that data is the inventory of your content. And does it have meta tags in there? I think when we think of from a marketer's, and of course, this is always true it's greener on the other side. We think marketers, they have all this information, Google Analytics, everything. And to some extent, they do have a lot of information there. But what are some of the things that, as a designer, they're thinking about these strategies and going, geez, I have my LMS data that pulls up completion reports and how many courses, but I'm kind of stuck. I think I don't have any other data. I don't have a learning record store for XAPI or anything, but I think there's some other data out there that people aren't thinking of. And of course, you talked about interviews and, what are some other data points that maybe people aren't thinking of that they might have that to look into? And then even starting an interview, if that's something I've never done before, it's kind of like, where do I start? Who do I even talk to? Do I talk to the CEO or do I talk to, linemen?
Yeah, let me start on the latter part, like that interview piece. So what I like to do is when I start a project like this, I call it an impact and clarity workshop where I actually get the business leader into a room and we're talking about, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this particular learning and development project? And that has a couple of, a couple of advantages because A, I really understand what the issue is, if there actually is an issue. Sometimes there really isn't. But also I'm like, hey, I'm on your side. I'm educating here on how we're going to work. I'm going to get your buy-in while we're talking. But this way I can also understand who they think I should interview, right? Because they are usually the closest to yeah, well, to the business. They're the business leaders, right? So who are the people, who are the learners I should talk to? And once I have the stakeholder buy-in, they're usually managers or, whatever, VPs, whatnot, they can then help me clear everyone's schedule. Because, if I ask, per persona, I usually like to get at least 10 to 15 people, and each person is roughly 30 minutes. Like that takes time away from, actual work. So I need to do the work first to convince the stakeholders that this is worth everyone's time, right? But yeah, that's always a good starting point to do it that way. And then, yeah, because I can't give you the answer, Paul. You have to, talk to the CEO. It really depends on the project, right? Who you want to talk to. But it's always good to have the end user, the learner, and then managers as well, like their managers to kind of see their point of view. And then I always have like high level, higher ups to just kind of like, what is it you want to get out? And then you kind of got to put it all together. So that gives you a great data point. Now with AI, what we do a lot when we do the interviews virtual, which we do 9 out of 10 times, you just have like your little AI buddy in the room, they transcribe it, then we just clean out the transcript to make sure there's no identifying information. And then we load it into a ChatGPT or a Claude and just help, have the tool help us analyze some of the trends and similarities and whatnot. But in terms of other data points, yeah, I mean, you definitely have your LMS, dig a little bit deeper and see if there's additional reports that you usually don't use or information you're not looking at. Like a big piece of information that a lot of companies don't look at is actually when do people access training? Like that tells you so much, right? Because then you can decide when you want to push out something to them. If they're always looking, like, let's say salespeople often do it after hours because during hours, working hours, they just have to be on the phone or email or whatnot. But, they take their training after hours. Great. That's when I push something out that needs their attention because I know during the day would get lost, right? So it's always really, really cool data point. So yeah, double check your LMS or LXP. Then, there's usually some kind of an HRIS system in place, so definitely go there. Most organizations have employee surveys that you can look into. So again, work with HR and talk to your IT department. If you have an intranet page, there's usually some good information you can pull from there too. Like what are common search terms that people put into their intranet page, right? So I think that's a good one. And yeah, I think those are kind of the common ones, unless to your point earlier, you want to start getting into Google Analytics and kind of pulling information from there. But I know not everyone has the advantage of doing that. But then, you can kind of combine it all in a BI dashboard, right? So you can kind of program that if you don't have an LRS that helps you put it all together. You can really create these dashboards that help you visualize all the information you're looking for.
Very cool. A lot of what you were describing there, what was crossing my mind though was, of course, that there's a lot of folks who are just one or two people, and there's a lot of time and a lot of effort. I mean, just you even mentioning how long it takes to do personas, half an hour interview each time. Like, is there like one thing that everybody can do, no matter how big they are, that you think would produce the most value from that perspective? Perspective being a smaller team who might not just have the time, they're just riding the wave.
Yeah. Whew, I don't really know how to answer that. I've been in that situation. I've been a one-woman show more times than I can remember, right? And I think the answer I would give here is like, it really depends on your organization and look for the low-hanging fruit, right? So where are areas where it is a low-hanging fruit, but you can also have the biggest bang for your buck, right? And it goes back to those impact and clarity workshops, like meet with the stakeholders, understand what's going on, understand what the need is. And then, yeah, identify one or two areas or elements where you can make a difference. So one thing that's usually rather easy to do is you have some content already. Let's go back to our compliance training. You have the content already. It doesn't need to be really, I mean, it would be nice to adjust it to the target audience, but we all know with compliance training that's usually not necessarily a thing. But you have the content, put it into an email course, right? So what I mean by that is instead of saying here's your half an hour, 1 hour e-learning module that you go through, how can you divide up that content and put it into 4 to 6 emails that you send out over 6 to 8 weeks? And there's tools out there like MailerLite that are free for up to 2,000 people. If you're in a larger organization, work with your marketing department because you usually have a marketing automation platform that sends out emails to clients. And then hopefully you could piggyback off that. But yeah, look at something you already have in place that you could just reshape basically, right? So the work effort is a little bit less.
Yeah. Yep. Low hanging fruit and small wins that can then add up to the opportunities potentially of getting to do the bigger things too, by at least demonstrating, hey, we've got this far. Now you've got a business case really to start going and looking for the opportunities, the time, the budget, or whatever's needed to do the next step in the process, for sure.
Yeah, don't expect to change the world overnight. It's not going to happen, right? Like if
Yeah.
you bring this marketing mindset into an organization, it takes time. There's change management that goes with that. It's a whole mindset shift for the stakeholders and the business owners, but also for the learners, right? If learners don't know, oh, there's an email, and then in 2 weeks there's another email, then they're like, I don't know, I don't see the connection, right? Like there's a lot of, change management that goes with this.
And I was thinking, as you talked about, so much of it is a journey, and we get caught up in the how come we don't have our results now, identifying some of those pieces. But it struck me, just you mentioned some of the data like time of day. And I'm thinking that can tell you a lot about your audience, what they're focused on, what their interest is or not interest in there, and perhaps how you would shape the message. And I think back to and we've all heard this before, but we get busy into I have to do this, and this, but of talking to the primary stakeholders over those trainings. And I'm thinking small team. Well, if I have 10 courses I need to do or for different 10 stakeholders, and 2 of them are willing to talk to me and actually give them, it sounds to me like those are the 2 that should have the priority on there, and I should think into the results and tying into that there, so I can get the other folks on board later down the road. Because again, like you said, you can't do everything, so some things do a little bit less at that particular area. But even like partnering with marketing, they're not the enemy out there. That they have some of these tools out there. I love the idea of the email, because almost all of them have a tool like that, and there's no reason that can't be used in the same type of way, except pointing in a different direction to your audience.
Yeah. And when I talk about email, I'm not referring to like a boring Outlook email. I'm referring to an HTML, highly visual, precise writing with a call to action, right? Like that's what I'm referring to. Because when I say email, or when we say email, often people are like, really? Like I already have enough emails, like, leave me alone. But it's, so from a marketing perspective, the reason you open an email is the subject line, right? Unless you obviously know, like, Chris is emailing you, says, well, you got to, get this done. And then obviously you open that email, maybe not, I don't know. But when you think about the marketing emails, right, you would only open them if the subject line aligns to something you need in the moment, right? Like it's a sign of interest. And we have to think about that from a learning perspective as well. So if you send out that email, what could the subject line be so it's enticing enough for someone to stop what they're doing? It's like, this sounds intriguing, right? And then you have your content in the email, and then that call to action, the CTA. When they click on that, it could go to an additional video, let's say. Marketers look at what they call the open rate, right? Like, are they interested? And then the click-through rate is like, okay, did we actually hook them in, and now they want to learn more and see more, right? So I think it's really important to look at that as well.
Yeah, and those types of tools typically also let you A/B, so you could write it one way and send it the other way, and then start seeing which things get the, the better results. And then that helps you improve your processes moving forward.
Yeah, 100%, right? A/B testing, yeah, big fan of A/B testing. I mean, you need a good, target size, sample size, but yeah, it's a great way. And it doesn't just have to be for emails. It could be for courses as well, right? Like make some small adjustments here or there and see what works better. And just like we should think about subject lines when we do emails, think about your course titles. Who has boring course titles? Like everyone, right? And so there's some really cool tools out there like Share Through Analyzer, Headline Analyzer, for example. So you can actually, type in your headline, and it's supposed to be a headline, but you can use it for a course title, and it gives you a score. It actually tells you, how well it will probably resonate with an audience out there. And it's just fun to think about this, because same idea then with an email. If you have a good course title that's intriguing, people are like, okay, I'm willing to spend the next 10 minutes on this. This sounds great. Mhm.
Yeah, I think of catching you, and a couple of things came to mind from the things you were talking about is some of the AI tools, and we kind of look at AI. Oh, what's the AI training? Well, some of those AI marketing, which there's plenty of those for those reasons to help them out, create that messaging. Oh, and by the way, as we're finding, a lot of the AIs want to know, hey, who am I targeting? Write it as an instructional designer. Well, who's the audience that you're targeting, and what's the purpose of that coming in there? So bringing those types of things in to really catch them in. I mean, just like any ad on Facebook or whatever else that you're scrolling through, which are the ones you clicked on and why? And it probably evoked an emotion or, or spoke to you on that.
Absolutely. And that emotional piece is just so important. So when you create your learner personas, that's really, for me, like where I get super excited, because we look at, okay, what do you see here and do? But it's the think and feel portion that gets me excited. And it's almost like in learning, it's like, oh, you can't talk about that. We don't want to know how they think and feel. It's like, yeah, but that is where we can make a difference, right?
Yes.
Because they're people. They're not just these learners coming to work and logging into the LMS. Like that's not what they want to do, right? And so when you design your learner journeys, that's why it's so important to have those emotions and the thinking piece tied to your learner journey, so you exactly understand at each step of the journey. How does Chris feel about that? How does Paul feel about that? How do I have to adjust my messaging so they're actually, you guys are actually excited and you want to learn more?
Mm-hmm. We have a tendency to have to provide content that's safe. So many organizations, the legal team has to review a lot of content, for example, and there are, and therefore even some of that drier language has to be, has to creep in. Even simple things though, like writing in a more personal style makes people connect better rather than a formal style as well.
Yeah, that is a huge sorry, Paul. I just want to real quick add to that. Like, that's a huge problem. So, we get asked that question often. It's like, well, I don't have, I can't do any of this. And then, if you can't change the training itself, let's look at the promotion of it. Is there at least something in that promotional aspect to raise awareness, like an email to promote something or announce something, that you can be a little bit more personable? Or it's, a video or something, a Microsoft Teams announcement or whatnot, right? So where can you get out of that box that, you're in? So
Mike has just dropped
like
into the chat. We can do some serious things and still have some personality. So.
When I was thinking, just to your comment there, I mean, that's a great, sometimes you have that training, we can't change this. This is following and it's been authorized for certain compliance, but changing the message around it to it, you can. And really speak to that person and the target audience that you're trying to get there. Why should they care? I mean, I think, and even in compliance, I've seen some. We partner with some different compliance groups who produce that content at Domino and sell that. But I look at some of the videos, and let's just say that some of the compliance videos are very emotional in a professional and respectful way.
Yeah.
I still remember some of them, even though I watched it like 3 years ago. So,
Well, exactly, right? So we have a big client, an automotive client down in the US, and talking about legal reviews, they take weeks. And when I first came to Ardent, it was all very, this is what it is, right? And again, I'm going back to the education of the client as well, right? And we showed them there's different ways of doing things. And gradually they opened up a little bit more. It still all goes through legal. There still needs to be, all the information, the small print and, all of that. But we just created really cool videos. We started with that last year. And we're replicating sports commentators, and they were actually commenting on salespeople's performance when they're in a dealership. So, someone walks in and then they're like totally ignoring the customer, and then, moves over to the sports commentators like, ooh, what just happened, right? And so we can have some fun with this, but it took a long time to get there. So I'm sharing this story to tell you, don't give up, right? Try, see where you can make changes, and eventually maybe, you'll be able to do things a little bit differently.
I think in front of the personas there too, I'm just thinking of, again, I've been a bit stereotypical, but who are those salespeople that are selling and with cars and stuff? They're probably, a lot of them on average are watching sports and seeing that commentary. So it's speaking to them in that way. And at the home, they're probably talking to the TV on some of it. So
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Bianca, this has been a really fascinating, as it always is, conversation about these things. I can't wait to get my hands on the book when it becomes available. And I think you probably speaking at ATD. Am I assuming
Yes.
correctly on this topic?
So, yeah, Mike and I will be at ATD. Exactly.
Also in
we're
May.
speaking
So
on the Monday there. Yeah.
If folks are going at ATD, they can check out your session there for sure too.
Yeah. And apparently we will have some early books for ATD already, which is about a week before the actual release. So I'm kind of excited about that too. So
yeah. A little bit of housekeeping before we wrap up. Hey folks, as we've mentioned, Instructional Designers and Offices Drinking Coffee is brought to you by Domino Learning Systems. Coming up in March, we have an authoring boot camp. So if you don't know anything about Domino One, you're just interested in learning more, free, open, gives you a 3-month trial subscription as well to test drive the tool. Paul has just dropped the link into it if you're interested in registering in that. We had a really great experience with this last summer when we did it the first time. Just a chance to come in and learn more about the tool and understand some of the pieces of it. So that's what Paul's dropping into the chat right now. And we look forward to catching up with some of you on that front as well too. Bianca, as I said, this has been a fabulous conversation. The book's going to be great when it comes, and we did drop a link into the chat on where folks can find that more info about it on the ATD site. So I think it's time to dance on out of here, guys. I'm just going to